Okay, Simon, can you confirm that the screen is visible?
Yes, looks good.
Wonderful. Okay, like I said, I'm going to be focusing on lesson plans for the session. I quickly want to introduce you to some of my colleagues, some of the people that are very involved with this module. There are others, our administrators, for example, but I've not included them in the session. For the session, I would like to introduce you to our head of department, which is Dr. Marinda Swart, myself, the module coordinator for this module, and Mrs. Sally Brown, who's my colleague as well. So you'll find that even though I'm overseeing the entire module, I will be handling queries with the degree and diploma students only. And my colleague, Mrs. Sally Brown, she will be handling the queries from all the higher certificate students. Okay, I know that lesson plans is something that many people are totally against, and just the thought of writing a lesson plan sends people into a tears. So I know even from my experience, I've also complained about having to write lesson plans when I had to teach some of the lessons. But you know, we often ask ourselves, why do we actually write these lesson plans? It's also very important to understand that when we write lesson plans, it enables our teachers to decide what they want their learners to learn. So you're planning how it's going to be taught, how this learning is then going to be measured. And when you prepare these lesson plans, you realize that you're actually building your own confidence. Now, these images look very nice. I must say, the one looks absolutely delicious. And I'm sure a lot of you are looking at it right now and wanting to eat a slice of the chocolate cake that's under expectations. However, if you look at the reality picture and if you look at the image that's on my extreme left, where the cake is actually flopping on its side, you wonder what's happening in these images and why is Mrs. Moodley now sharing these images with us. I'm going to give you a minute to ponder and look at these images and try to decide what exactly I'm trying to say. Okay, let's think about this for a moment, right? Let's look at these images and decide, would you bake a cake without a recipe? Yes, I'm sure you would. A lot of us will attempt to actually bake a cake without a recipe. But are you sure that this cake is now going to rise based on the amount of baking powder, for example, that you're putting in? How do you then know that all the ingredients that you're putting in for your recipe is actually going to lead to a cake being successful, the final product looking so good? So how do you then know that these right quantities are going to create the final product that you actually see for yourself? So then as much as you can bake this cake without the recipe, you have no idea how this cake is going to end up looking. It could end up looking as this cake that has flopped on my left-hand side. The reality is that this cake could end up being a muddled piece on my extreme right. So then what happens then? What will that final product be? So obviously you'd want to follow that recipe. You want to ensure that this cake, especially if you're making this cake now for a child's birthday party, you don't want to disappoint this child. You want that cake to look attractive. So similarly, when you are planning your lesson plans, it helps you to break down the task into more manageable activities. So you'll find that the more manageable the task is, the more successful the lesson becomes. It also helps you as the teacher to build your confidence. And that, trust me, by building your confidence, it leads to empowerment. And this is what you would want in your lessons. Okay, like I said to you, I'm not going to go through each and every lesson plan because when you look at your portfolio of evidence document, you will find that you've got a formal life skills lesson, you've got lesson plans for your formal maths and your formal storytelling lesson. If you look at the back of your portfolio of evidence document, there's sample generic lesson plans that you would be using for your 10 informal lessons. So time does not permit me to go through every single one. What I have done for this morning is that I've selected certain phases that I'd like to highlight with you. So it's self-explanatory for you to actually write your name and your student number, the date for the lesson, the correct term that you're selecting for teaching the lesson. That's also very important. The age group that you're teaching the lesson to. Now remember students, if you are teaching, if you are registered for the diploma or the degree, remember all your lessons have to be prepared for grade R learners. If you are registered in the highest certificate program, all your lessons should be prepared for learners that are in the grade double R or the triple R group. So remember the subject that you select as well. This refers to the 3 FP subjects that you will get from your curriculum documents. The content area is what you will get from your documents, and your lesson topic is also taken out of your curriculum documents. With regards to the outcomes, I'm going to quickly go over the lesson outcomes with you. If you look on my right-hand side, it refers to the outcomes and, of course, referring to what happens by the end of the lesson. So what exactly are lesson outcomes? Now, students, remember that these outcomes refer to what you want your learners to know at the end of the lesson. So what will they then be able to do by the end of the lesson? Remember, it is also very easy to measure your learner success when you have achievable and realistic goals. So what do you want your learners to know by the end of the lesson? Think about this carefully. Think about the verbs that you need to include in your lesson outcomes. Remember, by the end of the lesson, this is how you need to start writing it. So you'll say, by the end of the lesson, learners will be able to. So if you start writing your outcomes in that manner, remember you'll start using verbs. Don't try to achieve too much in a lesson. Yeah, what we say to you is that you need to be smart. So have specific outcomes. Make sure that these outcomes are measurable. They have to be achievable. They have to be realistic. They have to be age appropriate. And remember, all outcomes have to be timely as well. So I'm just going to quickly use the storytelling lesson outcomes for you. So for example, if you're choosing a lesson outcome for a storytelling lesson, you're obviously going to look at the aims and the outcomes from the curriculum documents itself. It doesn't matter whether you've selected the NCF document or you've selected the CAPS documents for your outcomes, but try and select what you feel is appropriate for those lessons. Remember, the aims in both these policy documents, it provides the basis for designing your outcomes for the lesson. So be careful not to now go and try and select too many outcomes. We suggest to our students that when you are choosing outcomes, try and choose at least 2 or 3 because those are more than enough. Remember, you're dealing with very little children. So when you fill in the section, I'd like for you to then, in the outcome section, to have your outcomes bulleted. So you will write 1 outcome per line and you will have them in bullets. So let me just give you a quick example of what an outcome would be for the storytelling lesson and what sort of question could be asked based on that. So you could ask your learners, if you look at the cover of this book, for example, what do you see? Tell me what you think the story is about and why do you think so? So you can see that by formulating your outcomes, you can easily ask age-appropriate questions for your students, your learners actually. So some of the lesson plans have sources listed, and I often get queries from students, Mrs. Modi, what are these sources? What are they referring to? Now remember students, the sources would be probably the documents that you're using. So for example, if you are using the life skills CAPS document, in the section for sources, you are going to write CAPS life skills document, and then you're going to put the page number that you've actually selected your lesson from. If you've used your NCF document, perhaps you can then write your NCF. You can choose or write down the selected elder that you've got, and of course the page number for that elder. So that is basically what you will be writing under sources. In some cases, students use other books, so you can record those here as well. And of course, you're actually accessing the internet as well. So by all means, put the URL here as well. So we like to see where exactly you're sourcing your information for this lesson. With regards to assessment strategies, now remember, your assessment is always linked to your outcomes. So don't ever forget the fact that whatever you are assessing has to be what you've listed as your outcomes. These two are linked very, very closely. So here you're going to list how you're going to assess each of the outcomes that you had listed previously. So the description of how you're going to assess your learners must be detailed. Here, we want to emphasize some of the tools for assessment. You could probably use observation, questioning, you could have a test, worksheets, even written activities can be assessed. But remember, students, that the most common form assessment for little children from the ages of 2 to 6 would be observation. Now, let's move on to the lesson introduction. So obviously the introduction here is where you're going to introduce your topic in a fun, creative way. You need to capture your learners' attention so they want to learn. Here you need to have, it's usually a very short part of the lesson. It's usually about 5 to 10 minutes. It may entail an icebreaker. You may want to capture your learner's attention by having a song or a poem. You can use strategies to assess your learner's prior knowledge. I mean, there's various tasks that you could use. But remember, students, if you are asking the learners questions, in the introduction section, there are more than enough lines, so you can write down those questions there. However, if you run out of lines, 4 questions maximum. Don't ask them too many questions. And if the space does not permit that, then of course attach an appendix and you can have your questions written on a separate piece of paper. It also helps you to think about the question before times, because then you don't have to ask them obvious questions. You don't have to ask them too much of the same type of questions. And of course, you'll actually be able to explore a wide range of questioning. So if you look at the introduction of a story lesson, we're going to use that as an example now. Obviously, when you start off a story lesson, we'd like for you to use perhaps an age-appropriate song, a rhyme, or perhaps a poem, because little kids like things like that. They love the rhyme and the songs. So once you've selected this poem or song, for example, attach that as the words of that as an appendix. And don't forget that no matter how many appendices you use in the lesson, these need to be referenced and need to be attached to the end of the lesson. So if, for example, you are teaching your grade art learners, the introduction could include details such as, because they're a bit older, you could introduce the story to them by talking about the author, for example, or the illustrator of the book. Right, so we move on now to the lesson development. Now, this is actually an extremely important part of any lesson plan, because here you're giving in this phase as much detail as possible as to how you're going to teach this lesson, what you are going to be doing, and of course, the various activities that your learners are going to do as well. So here, as the assessor, we need to see as much detail as possible on how you're going to do these activities. Describe how you're going to do it and how you are going to teach the learners and how obviously what they're going to do thereafter. So for example, if you're reading a story, you will have in this section the title, author, and illustrator, and you'll have a summary of the story, right? And then you'll attach a copy of the cover of the book as an appendix. So if you would decide then in other lessons, for example, you're doing a life skills or a maths lesson, and you decide, okay, I want to use a worksheet. So describe how you're going to teach that worksheet and what learners will be doing thereafter. We like to see as much detail as possible, and of course, attach a copy of that worksheet as an appendix as well. Remember, in this section, it's an in-depth explanation of how the lesson is going to progress, and it'll give you step-by-step instructions of everything where you're going to begin teaching this lesson in your classroom, and instructions right until the very end. And you can decide the type of activities you want, but please remember to give us as much detail as possible. Of course, there's also the possibility that in the event of you being absent, and if another teacher has to fill in, they will know exactly what to do when they're teaching this lesson. So that's also very, very important. Then there's the description of the activity. In some of the lesson plans, you will not see lesson development, but you'll see description of activity. This is actually similar to actually telling us what the lesson development is. And I know that we haven't provided a lot of lines in the section, but try and include, as you've done the lesson development, try and include as much teaching and learning activities in this section as well. We'd like to see that. We want to see what you're doing in your classrooms and how you're going about in your teaching experience, teaching these lessons to your learners, and of course, what they're going to be doing thereafter. Wow, this is another interesting section that we find common problems with. Now, I always say to students, when you're asking these questions, you need to think Bloom's taxonomy. I know I mentioned to you that in the introduction, you'll be asking questions to assess prior knowledge, but when you reach this section of your lesson plan, you are actually asking your learners what they've learned from the lesson, basically. So you're trying to determine if your learners have actually achieved the outcomes. So let's look at level 1 questioning, for example. What I'd like for you to do is in your free time to just Google Bloom's taxonomy and try and look at the different levels of questioning that you could ask your little learners, right? In the case of our lesson planning, you'll notice that there's only 3 levels of questioning that's required. And in level 1, you find that this section is very, very basic. It requires lower order thinking skills, and it's basically based on facts. So you could ask your learners questions such as, what happened, why, can you name, which, how many, things like that. So very, very simple questions. However, when you move on to level 2 questioning, you'll find at this level, it requires a little bit more thinking, and you're going to ask a bit more open-ended questions. So you could ask questions such as, can you explain how would you, what do you think happened, and why did it happen? So obviously, you're getting your learners to think a bit more. By the time you reach the level 3 of questioning, obviously this is higher order questioning. You're assessing more of a higher order thinking skills. You can ask your learners questions such as, do you know of another? What would you ask? What would you do differently? Um, I'm just thinking of another one. What was the best part of the story, and why do you think it was the best part of the story? So these are common questions that you could ask your learners at level 3 questioning. So I suggest that you spend some time going over this, because what we do find is a lot of students actually struggle with the level of questions that they write for their learners. Now remember, with your little children, those that are in the double naught and triple naught classes, most of the questions will probably still only be based on level 1 questioning. So you probably won't even want to do level 2 or level 3. But obviously, you've got to then decide on the ability and of the age of your learners, because remember, not all our learners are on the same level. Right, this section here where it requires you to have a photo of the layout and the resources. So for example, if you are reading the story lesson to your learners, perhaps you could have a picture here of someone reading a story and there's little children, or you can get your mentor teacher to take a photo of you reading the story. But please, students, remember, you're not allowed to put pictures of your learners, so their faces should not be exposed. If you're doing the maths outdoor game, you perhaps take a photo of the layout that you're using. If you're using your life skills lesson, if you're teaching that lesson, for example, the area of maybe the construction area or your painting area, you can take photos of that, and you can actually stick those pictures in the section in your lesson plan. So that's pretty straightforward there, but I somehow find that students struggle with this aspect as well. Consolidation of lesson is pretty simple. It's where you are now doing the conclusion. Here as well, you need to state in full sentences using the last 5 to 10 minutes, how are you now going to end this lesson with your learners? Remember, with 5 to 10 minutes, you don't expect all of your learners to answer the question. So you've got to find innovative ways to now consolidate this lesson and to make sure that even when you reach now this final part of your lesson, your learners are still interested in the lesson. They still want to be a part of the lesson. So try and recap all your new concepts and skills here. Be very practical. Don't just say, I will review what they've learned and I'll answer any questions that they have. Try and be very, very creative. Give some detail here. You have space to write, so then use up that space as well. So there are many techniques that you can use in the final stages. Like for example, in your storytelling, you can recap sequences of the story that you've read. You can recap the events of the story. You can get some of the learners to talk about that and prompt their memory recall. You can discuss an important aspect of the story that you feel that it has a valuable lesson for your learners. So remember, your story lesson in most of your classrooms is usually done towards the end of the day. So this is a quiet time. It's a rest period before the arrival of the parents to come and fetch their children. For this, you could probably repeat the song that you used in the introduction, because that song is actually relevant to the topic that you're teaching the children. So have that soothing song and end of your lesson by using that. That's just an example that I'm giving you. Then, of course, the resources. This will be all the resources that you're using for the lesson. So here, we need you to list your resources. Here you need to tell us, for example, you've used your storybook. Oh, sorry, your storybook you've already listed, so don't list it here. Your curriculum documents, don't list it here because you're going to be recording that later. So whatever resources you've used, perhaps you've used a hat or paintbrush or whatever resources that you've used, an additional book, you can put that here as well. So that will help you to list your resources in this section. We then move on to the reflection part of this lesson. Now remember, students, when you are reflecting on a lesson, it's usually done after you teach the lesson. And I like this little saying that I put up for you by John Dewey, where it says, we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And I think this is so appropriate when we are actually assessing the lessons that we teach. Because remember, even us as lecturers, when we actually teach in lectures or online, we go back and we reflect on the lesson itself. What when happened? Was there any successes that we experienced? Were there any failures in the lesson? Of course, by reflecting, you find that you actually can improve on your lesson. Or if you find that a certain section of your lesson was successful, you'll want to implement that for future lessons as well. So it actually helps you to realize what you've done well, what you've not done well. It'll tell you of aspects of the lesson where you feel, okay, was this too easy for my learners? Was this perhaps too difficult? Were my learners easily distracted? Were all the objectives achievable? I mean, I selected 3 outcomes and I thought that I could teach this lesson to my learners, but then you suddenly realize at the end that perhaps I shouldn't have as many objectives and they were not all achievable. So this is actually very good for you actually planning to teach this lesson in future. I find that this is very, very important because you as a teacher will grow and you'll refine your practice. And where it says, what will I do differently next time? States, tell us what happened in the lesson. Tell us in detail. You've got many lines there. So tell us what happened in this lesson for you want to do it differently next time. And then what would you do differently next time? Tell us that. We like to see things like that. What contributed to the success of my lesson? Here as well, please try and use full sentences. Don't just say that your mentor teacher helped you and therefore that lesson was a success, but you need to reflect on the lesson itself and you make use of these lines. Like I said, there's plenty of lines. We want to see what contributed to the success of your lesson as well. It's important for you to reflect in detail. Okay, references. So here at Embury, or should I say Stadio School of Education, we use the Harvard referencing style. And you'll find that this referencing guide is placed on your ECI page. It's been there from the beginning of your course. So please use this style of referencing when you are listing all your references. In this section, we expect you to refer to all the websites you've used, if you've accessed books, if there's any articles that you've accessed, write this down in your lesson plan. And of course, remember, students, in this section, you must also list your curriculum documents. So if, for example, you've used the CAPS document, whatever CAPS document it was, it needs to be referenced using the Harvard referencing. And the same would then apply to the NCF document if you'd use that. Right, so this here is also something that we find is such a common problem with our students. And I think I want to quickly go over this 4 parts of this life skills assessment. This, for some reason, seems to confuse a lot of students. And I'm sure that for those of you that have actually managed to read your curriculum documents or your study guide and your portfolio of evidence, whatever booklets that we've issued to you this year, I'm sure that some of you have actually looked at this section and thought it's confusing. So what I want to do is spend a few minutes to explain what the 4 parts are, just to give you a better understanding of what the expectations are and how you're going to go about doing this activity. So if you look at part 1, it says that you need to prepare a creative arts lesson. So obviously you are going to then liaise with your mentor teacher, and it could be based on the content that she's teaching at the moment. So there's probably a particular theme that's being taught, and your mentor teacher is going to guide you and advise you on what type of lesson plan you're going to write. So that's the first part. You are going to write out your lesson plan. The next part of that is where you are going to design the week-long roster. I'm going to show you the roster just now, and I'm going to briefly tell you what the roster entails. So with regards to the roster, we are asking you to design the roster. Nowhere there do we say that you need to teach all of the activities. So when you're designing this roster, speak to your mentor teacher, because obviously you'd want to be the roster to be based on the theme. And of course, if your mentor teacher is accommodating and can allow you to at least teach some of those activities, then by all means, please do so. However, we do understand the time constraints and we don't expect you to teach every single aspect of the roster. So that is actually a common question that we have from students as well. In part 3 of this activity, it requires you to actually then go and to present your lesson. So now you've prepared your lesson plan, you've got your roster prepared. Now we want you to liaise with your mentor teacher and find a suitable date and time, and you then teach your lesson. So that's what part 3 entails. Part 4 is also something that our students really, really struggle with, because the labels page is something that seems to confuse a lot of our students. So here you're required to complete the labels for your creative arts lesson. And I'm going to show you now an extract of the labels page as well, and show you exactly what you should be putting on this page. And of course, students, please remember that whatever photos, drawings, and labels that you have, these need to be stamped using the official school stamp, and your mentor teacher needs to sign these, right? So please remember that these documents also need to be filled in and stamped by your school before you submit it for assessment. Right, this is the creative arts roster that I mentioned to you. Now you'll find that we've provided you with activities for a complete week. So you'll find that there's activities, and then we expect these activities to be completed from Monday to Friday. And then you'll find at the bottom of each roster where it speaks about the main activity for the day. Students, what you also need to do here is that you've got to, for example, if you have a cutting and pasting activity, right? So let me just give you an example. For example, on a Monday, you give your learners magazines, right? All magazines that are lying around, you give these to your learners. And for example, maybe your theme at that moment is my family, right? So that's the theme that's being covered at school for that week. You would then ask your learners to cut out pictures of different members of a family. So perhaps a grandpa, a grandma, someone that looks like a mother, a child, a baby, right? And then you get your learners to paste that on a piece of cardboard. So that is the activity that you're giving to them on Monday. The outcome for that activity would be written in full. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you would say that that space is not sufficient. You are more than welcome to write on a separate piece of paper if you feel that this is insufficient space. So you write down the outcome, learners will be able to cut out pictures of family members and stick onto a cardboard. That's the outcome. The resources that you're going to be listing here will be the resources that you're actually using for this activity. You know that you're giving your learners the magazine, so that's one of the resources. You know that your learners are going to use the scissor, and you know that they're going to be using Prit, and you know that they're going to use the cardboard to stick this on. So those are the resources that you are going to be listing. And that's how you're going to follow each of the activities per day. Now remember, in an ECD environment or in a grade R classroom, you have different sections of activities taking place simultaneously. So in one table, for example, you'll have a group of learners that are doing cutting and pasting. In the other table, you'll probably have a painting activity going on, a drawing activity on another table, and a molding on another table. So you decide for that particular day, what is your main activity, and that will be listed at the bottom. The other thing that we as the assessors like to look for is under the main activity, you'll find your life skills lesson. So the formal life skills lesson, whichever day of the week that is presented, if you could please, for example, if it's done on the Tuesday, if you could please write there formal life skills lesson and what that lesson topic was about, right? We like to see that as assessors as well. Okay. The other thing that I really need to stress on is the labels. And as I mentioned, the 4 parts of the formal life skills lesson, the labels page is actually a very, very simple page, but for some reason, it's very, very confusing to a lot of students as well. If you look at your study guide, you'll find that in the study guide, we talk about handwriting. So one of the sections that's covered is handwriting. And we say to our students that we expect you to write out the labels. Please do not go then and print labels, right? An ECD classroom, a grade R classroom is a very print-rich environment. So what we're expecting you to do, the labels page requires you for the formal life skills lesson, you will have your various resources that you're using for the lesson. For example, if you have a paintbrush and you're using red paint, so next to the paintbrush, you will have the word paintbrush written using either one of these fonts. So the font that we want you to use is either the ball and stick, which is on the top, or the Natalia font, which is at the bottom. So for each of the resources that you're using, you will handwrite the labels and you'll place it next to it. All you have to do thereafter is to take a photo of those labels and to stick it onto the labels page. That is a very, very simple task. Or perhaps you were so pressurized, sometimes you're presenting a lesson, you are nervous and you are anxious, and you just forget about actually taking the photo. So then what you could do is write out the labels on this page, and the assessors will accept that as well. So I hope that in this lesson, we've covered the aspects of the lesson plans that we find that our students really struggle with. And I hope that this little bit of information that I've shared with you is going to assist you when you're doing your lesson planning. And I really hope that all of you can get that opportunity to start your TP in July when we're expecting schools to be operational. We can be hopeful, but however, students, I assure you, just as we are now assisting our July intake students, our July 2019 students, we will do everything possible on our side to assist you with this module as well. So that brings me to the end of our presentation for lesson planning. I want to use the next few minutes to actually answer some questions from students, because I feel that PP does have a lot of questions, and although students send us ECI messages and emails, some of these questions are misunderstood, or some of the answers get misunderstood. So I'd like to use the next few minutes to answer a few questions. And I thank you for joining the session once again. I deliberately chose a picture of saying thank you for coming, because that's the reality we face right now. We come together in all these empty environments, but we still get to meet each other. So I thank you once again. If you have queries, please feel free to email myself or my colleague, Mrs. Brown, and we're more than willing to assist you with your queries. So are there any questions right now?
Vanessa, our YouTube stream runs a few seconds behind our Zoom stream, so we'll give our YouTube students a little bit of time to catch up in terms of posting questions and comments.
Okay.
We've had a number of questions in the Q&A feature. The first question is, will this recording be put on the TP100 ECI site so that students can watch the recording again? I can answer that and say yes. The recording will be made available early in the new week, so before the end of business on Monday, that recording should be placed inside of the TP100 module site on ECI. But in the meantime, students, if you make use of the YouTube access link, which is in the program news site, and it's also available on the homepage of the DL ECI server, you can actually access the entire recording from this morning, and you can watch any section of that. So until the formal recording is made available on Monday, please do make use of the YouTube recording and access the recording via that YouTube link. Vanessa, our next question is from Elzan, and she'd like to know, how should students include references in the portfolio of evidence, all at the end or along with each activity?
Okay, my suggestion to students is that for each of your activities that you complete, references should be done as you go along. So please don't leave it for the end of the portfolio of evidence. For example, if you find in all your lesson plans, there is a section for referencing, you will reference there. If you are doing any of the 10 writing activities, and you will ensure that each of those activities will be referenced as you go along. So please don't give us an entire 2-page or 3-page document at the end. We want to see the referencing with each of the activities that you complete.
Thanks, Vanessa. Next, Jade says, thank you for the lesson, and asks, how long is the practical for?
Thank you for that question, Jade, and thank you for actually acknowledging this lesson. I actually felt it's very, very important, and I think it'll be useful when you go to school. Your practical is a 6-week practical. So what will happen is that it's going to be for 30 consecutive school days. I do understand there's anxiety now because the pandemic has disrupted so many aspects of our lives. And I know that students have used up annual leave. A lot of you are working in the corporate environment. If there is any concern regarding the number of TP days that you have to complete, I suggest that you send us an email and state your concerns to us, and we'll try and assist every student on an individual basis, because not all your circumstances are the same.
Thank you, Vanessa. Nicole is also feeling concerned and says that it seems like grade R will likely be one of the last grades to resume school. She asks, what happens if students have already organized dates with the school and submitted willingness to host forms, but grade Rs only go back after these initial dates? She states it's quite difficult for those who are working and have had to put in leave to try and adjust the dates if that is the case. And she says another concern is time. What happens if the grade Rs do only go back later than originally planned. It's stressing to think about trying to do the practice, complete the portfolio of evidence, and career to Durban. What will happen then?
Thank you for that question, Nicole. I'm sure that that's a question on many, many students' minds right now, that the fact that grade R learners will be going so much later to school, and if they actually will be going to school this year. So at this point, I wish I had a proper answer to give to all the students right now, because as much as the Department of Education is asking educators to go back on Monday, we don't know if that's actually going to happen, because remember, there's a whole talk about PPEs that needs to be. So let us just wait for everything to progress. Let us see how the schools resume, and if our grade 12s and our grade 7s do actually start on the 1st of June. So that will actually give us an indication of how the other grades are going to resume their classes. So I would say to all students, please wait and let us see how this pandemic progresses. Remember, they said we haven't reached the peak as yet. So what we are doing as a teaching practice department, we are constantly making changes to accommodate the pandemic. Trust me, we are currently assisting the July students in getting them to finish their TP. We will do exactly the same when it comes to you. And with regards to completing activities and submitting your portfolio of evidence, there's a high probability that you can also submit that online. So rather wait for messages from us. If there are genuine concerns that you have and you feel that, especially with the leave that you've already actually applied for and you might not even be getting that leave right now, we want to help you, and we will help you on an individual basis. So Nicole, if you could just send us an email stating your concerns, and we'll try and advise you best that way.
Thank you, Vanessa. Nicole also has a second question, which is of a practical nature. She asks, with regards to the portfolio of evidence, if students run out of space when completing the activities in the portfolio, are they allowed to add additional pages in? And if they do, will they be penalized for adding additional pages?
By all means, you can add as many pages as you want, Nicole. Like I said, with the Creative Arts roster, you may find that that space is not sufficient. If you want to add a page for that and add more, by all means do so. And no student will be disadvantaged for providing more information. In fact, it's actually good to see what you're doing in your classrooms. And I know even a lot of students that send us photos of the activities and the lessons that they're teaching. We're not there with you, so it actually helps us to get into the classroom when you're showing us those photos and all the lovely things that you were actually engaged in. So Nicole, by all means, add as many pages as you want. You will not be penalized.
Thanks, Vanessa. Lorraine, Nicole also says thank you. Lorraine adds that thank you for this session. It's been very useful. So thank you, Lorraine. That's very nice to hear.
Yes.
Another question from Colette. Colette wants to know what happens if students are already at a grade R school.
It depends. I'm not sure what you have been registered for. So for example, if you are registered for the degree program or the diploma in grade R program, then if you are in a grade R school and you're currently teaching a grade R class, then your mentor teacher will probably be a more experienced teacher or the HOD, because remember, someone needs to assess your lessons. But if, like I said, send us an email and we'll give you proper clarity on how you're going to go about having that person chosen as your mentor teacher. So by all means, if it's a grade R environment and you are registered for a qualification that requires you to be in grade R, then you can complete your teaching practice there. However, if you are registered for the higher certificate program, and if, for example, your school does not have a double naught or triple naught, then of course we still got to speak to you about arrangements where you need to then complete your TP in an ECD environment. But I have suggestions for students, and we will deal with those on an individual cases. So please send us emails and we'll advise you on how to proceed.
We have a comment from Melody who says, thank you so much, Vanessa. This session has really helped, and I'm sure a lot of students will echo that sentiment.
Thank you, Melody.
If we look at some of the questions and comments coming from YouTube, Anine asks, what happens if students have already completed lesson plans without knowing these important points that you've just mentioned in this session today?
Well, you've got plenty of time to go and edit them, and you know, it's work in progress. So you are not ready to submit just yet. So if I was you, go and amend it and correct whatever needs to be corrected, because I really don't want you to be losing out on valuable marks with regards to your lesson planning. You do have much time, and there are multiple copies that you can make. So yeah, I would suggest that you correct it.
Teresha asks, does teaching practice need to be done in an ECD school?
Well, it depends on what the student is registered for, because remember, some of our public schools actually have some ECD centers. So for example, if a student is going to a school that starts from double naught or triple naught and goes all the way up to grade 7, by all means, you can complete your TP there. However, there are some schools that don't have that. So you have to then go to a registered ECD center to complete your TP.
Yes, Anine adds that they are a July 2019 student.
Oh, July 2019 students should actually be finalizing their TP and should be submitting. We do have a new due date for our July students, and that is the 26th of May. So I would say to those students that have been registered as part of the July intake, remember you should be finalizing all your POE activities. There is an option for you to submit online. And I must say thank you to Simon, because you set that up beautifully for us. And yes, the other option is for you to courier your POE to the Durban campus. Remember, students, you can even courier it on Tuesday. As long as your delivery note indicates 26th, we will accept your POE.
Thanks, Vanessa. Mahlatsi asks, with regards to the labels page, do students need to draw the things that they have used, like drawing a paintbrush?
Not necessarily. So if, for example, if a student chooses to actually take a photo of the activity with the labels next to the resources and sticks that photo there, we'll accept that. Or if a student may then say, okay, I'm just going to write out the labels without the pictures, we will also accept that.
Great. Next, Anesha, who is a January 2020 student, asks, if the grade R students do only go back to school in September, as late as September, how would it be possible for January 2020 intake students to be able to complete their teaching practice?
As we've done with the July intake students, we will actually prepare for those activities to be implemented in such a way that the January intake students can still complete the module. I think a lot of these answers will depend on when the schools actually do open. It's a bit premature for me to now commit to anything, because I myself have no idea if schools will open on the scheduled dates. But I assure you, students, as part of the Jan intake, as we've assisted the July intake students, we'll do everything in our power to assist you in completing your TP as well.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you, Vanessa, for your commitment. And it's good to know that there are some contingency plans in place.
Yes.
The fact that the Stadio School of Education runs different program intakes means that we are able to adjust requirements and timing across intakes. So we do have processes and procedures in place, but like you say, it all really just depends on what happens next in terms of schools opening and learners going back to schools. And
Yes.
Unfortunately, at this stage, we're all in the same boat, awaiting the announcements and the regulations from government.
Yes, that is true. I'm sorry, students. I wish I could be more helpful with regards to answers, but we are, like Simon says, we're all in the same boat right now, and everything depends on when the schools open.
Yes. Another question from Anesha, Vanessa, is that the TP file that students are submitting, it was mentioned in the POE that students must not put leaflets, so they must punch holes and then put them into lever arch files. Is that still correct?
Well, a student can decide to send the portfolio of evidence booklet as is, or they may decide to put it into a file. What we do suggest is that, yes, the leaflets are not allowed. What the student's referring to is the plastic sleeves. It makes it very, very difficult for the assessors, because if students submit everything in sleeves, a portfolio of evidence, for example, takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to mark each one. Imagine how time consuming it must be for you, for the assessor to then remove each page from the plastic sleeve, to mark it, and then to put each one back in. So to prevent that, we ask our students to actually punch holes and submit the portfolio of evidence if they are putting it into a file.
Yes, that makes good sense. Um, thank you, Vanessa. A round of thanks from Anin, Tarisha, and Anisha for your excellent answers.
Are there more questions, Simon?
I'm just checking here. No more questions from YouTube. I'm just checking on Zoom. Let's just have a quick look here. Megan asks, is a 00 a group 3 class? And if so, what is a 000 class? Which age group?
Okay, I assume that you are registered for the highest certificate program. If you're still unsure about where you need to be placed, can you just send me a quick email and I'll answer that for you on an email? Because I think a lot of students don't know how to differentiate between the two age groups. Remember, the age group of your learners also determines the activities that you are going to be completing with them. So I'd rather give you an individual answer regarding that and guide you on how you can actually prepare for those lessons, because you don't want to have your learners too little as well. You must be able to teach them lessons.
Thanks, Vanessa. A very important question from Melody. Please advise how best do students go about selecting schools to do their teaching practice at this stage?
Okay, what we always tell our students is that we do have a database of schools that we are actually putting together. So if you are hesitant about approaching a particular school, if you could please speak to one of our administrators. Obviously, a school needs to be functional. We prefer for the school to be a registered school. We prefer for a school to be in operation for many years. And of course, it must have educators that can mentor you with the necessary qualifications and experience. So if you could find that in approaching your schools, by all means approach those schools. But if you are still unsure, our administrators are more than willing to assist you in finding a school.
Vanessa, Lineker and Anna-Marie say thank you so much for this lesson plan information and for this session. It's really helped a lot. They appreciate it.
Yeah.
And Anna-Marie asks, will the lesson plans depend on the ECD Center theme of the week? Should students first discuss it with the center?
Definitely. I think it's very important when you're planning your lessons that you liaise with your mentor teachers. Don't just go and plan your lessons without actually speaking to them, because your mentor might say to you, please, I want all your lessons to focus on the theme that we are currently teaching. Or the mentor might say to you, you know what, you can plan the lesson that you have in mind. So that's why I say communication with your mentor teacher is extremely important.
Great. Vanessa, thank you so much. There are no further questions or comments at this stage, but students, please, if you didn't get a chance to make a very important question, do follow up with your lecturer through your ECI module site or via email. Vanessa, I'm quite sure your contact details are available on your site.
Yes, students have been contacting me, so it's fine. They will be able to email me as well.
That's wonderful. Vanessa, thank you so much for this very important and very informative session. I know our students really have enjoyed it. I know you've addressed a lot of their concerns, and I know they're feeling a lot better about what happens next. We will monitor what government regulations regarding the lockdowns happen, and I'm sure you'll be communicating with them accordingly.
Definitely. Please look out for ECI messages from me, students. I will be updating you as we go along, and you will not be in the dark with regards to this module and with regards to your actual teaching practice. If you have any concerns or queries, please feel free to contact us at any time.